Hey everybody, this is a new series where I'll be documenting my DSA practice questions. What I'll be doing here is I'll be sharing my thought process and we will look in the code. We'll look at the solution and let's get started. This is a fairly easy question. Let's just read the question first. Given an array or array num of size n, return the majority element. The majority element is the element that appears more than n by 2 times or 50% of the time, and more than 50% basically. You may assume that the majority element always exists in the array. So the easiest solution would be, or I think after hearing the question, the solution that comes to your mind is to use a hash map. So what a hash map would do is you would just keep track of each element. You'd have a key for each element in the array. You'd increment the count for each item. And at the end, you would just check which item has the maximum element. So let me just write some, very little code just to give if you do not understand that. So I'm going to say, I can say this as my nums, not this as my input. We won't write the whole solution. We'll just look into the part of the solution. So I'm going to say if this is a hash map, so I'm going to say count dict. I can say I can do this and say for nums for an item in a nums. I'll walk through each item in the list, and what I'll do is I'll check if that item exists in the count dict, right, in the count dict. So I'll say if item not in count dict, I'll add that. So I'm going to say count dict of item equals to 0, and I'll just increment the count here. So I can just take this and say plus equal to 1, and at the end now I have a dictionary with each item in the list as the key and the count. I can just use the max function or use just run through the loop and find the maximum value. Now this is not the solution we are looking into. The solution we'll be looking is at the Moore's voting algorithm, and I'll be explaining this with an analogy, right? So if you think about this, right, let me just use a different analogy. Instead of numbers, I'm going to use letters, right? So I'm going to say A, I've got B, I've got C, I've got D, and A, comma, A space, A space, A. So we've got 7 items here, right? And the question says more than 50% of the time, there is one single element with more than 50% of the time, right? So I could say the possible solution here would be 7 equals 4 plus 3, where 4 items are the same, and then there are 3 different items, just like we have here. So what I would like to show you is the way we could solve it. Like with one certainty, what we can say is if I were to remove these 3 items, right, and remove 3 of them, like remove 3 of the items from A, then I'd have 1. So not 7's not equal to 1. What I have is 1 item left of A, right? So if I just show you this here, so let's say I remove this A, I remove this B, I remove this C, I remove A, and I'm going to remove A, and remove A here. What I always have is the element that's available more than 50% of the time, right? I think you can kind of figure that out, right? So the solution kind of looks through that like this, right? I'll just write the solution here, and what I'll do is I'll just keep track of a count, right? Okay, just before that, maybe I'll do this, right? Before we look in the solution, let me just add one more thing. We will start by looking at the count, right? So what I'll do is if I see the same item, right, I'll increase the count, right? The reason for this is, let's say I've got A here, right? When I see a different element, I know that's when I kind of remove this, right? Because if I have the same element, I increase the count, right? We want to find the majority element. And so what I do is if I have the different elements, so I've got A here, I see B, I'm going to remove both of them, right? I don't care about that next because they just cancel off, right? I see C now, right? And the next element is D. Obviously, let's just cancel those out, right? Those goes away. And then I have A, I have A, I have A, like we just have A's left, right? Now, despite the order, right? If this is A, comma B, comma A, comma D, C, comma A, comma D, comma A, right? If you look at this, if this is the order, we see A as the first element, we see a different element, and we cancel this off, right? We see A, we see C, we cancel this off, and then we have A, we got D and A, so we have left what we have left is A. Well, essentially what happens here is the element which has more than 50% of the time stays in the list, right? So let's just write some code. So I'd say count equals 0, right? This is used to keep track of the number of items in that, number of same items. And what I'm going to say is, let's just bring in our input, right? Let's just say this is nums. See, let's just bring this here and count equals 0. What I'm going to assume is my initially answer is none, right? Before even traverse. What I'm going to do is traverse through the array. So I'm going to say for item in nums, right? And if the count is 0, right, this is where I start, right? So now the count is 0. I take the first element as my answer. I'm assuming that 2 is my answer. So I'm going to say answer equals the item in the list, the first item in the list. And so when do I do that? When the count is 0, right? So if count equals 0, this happens. You know what? We'll just write this in a Python terminal so I have indentation. So I'm going to solutions. I'll do this, right? And answer equals item, right? And so when answer equals item, so we have 2 as we're assuming 2 is the answer. And what do I do? And if there's the same, I'm going to increment the count, right? So I'm going to say if item equal to answer. So let's say we've done this, right? We increment the count, and so if item equals to answer, and what do? We increase the count. So I'm going to say count equals count plus 1, right? And if that's not the case, right, if there are different elements, we want to cross it out, right? So if got, let's say we're at A, and let's just write that down. So count equals, let's say 1, right? And we have our, in the alphabet analogy we did, we have the current as A, right? The moment so next, let's say next is B, what do? We decrease the count, and automatically we set the next item. Like when we traverse, when we run through the loop, the next item automatically becomes the, we just cancel out, right? Because we're pointing to the next item in the element item in the array, right? So what happens here is we got this, and if they're not the same, what do? Is we count equals count minus 1, right? And what's our result? Basically the answer is our answer. The variable answer contains the element with which has not been crossed out, with the count which has greater than 0, like obviously because all the elements have cancelled out. And this is the solution. You could always write this as a function. You could do the def f, right? You can just do this. Let me just put this here, and you could always return the answer, right? And there you go, right? And let's just put that inside. There you go, right? We can always do this, right? Doesn't really matter. Thank you so much for watching.